What if I told you that the most powerful government in the world might not be the one you see on television? That behind elections, speeches, and political drama, there could be another layer of power, quieter, more patient, and far more permanent. It sounds like a Hollywood thriller, but some insiders claim it's not fiction at all, and if even a fraction of this is true, then everything we think we know about power could be incomplete. This is the story of what many call the deep state, not as a simple conspiracy, but as a controversial idea explored through the accounts of insiders, analysts, and critics, because before we dismiss it, or believe it, we need to understand it. And trust me, by the end of this video, you might start looking at the news very differently. Let's begin with a simple question. What if power didn't change even when leaders did? Every election promises change, new policies, new direction, a fresh start. But look closely at history and you'll notice something strange. Governments change, but certain policies, alliances, and long-term strategies seem to continue almost untouched, as if something deeper is guiding the direction behind the scenes. Why does that happen? Is it simply stability, as some experts suggest, or is there a deeper structure quietly ensuring continuity regardless of who is in charge? According to a former intelligence insider whose claims remain debated and controversial, there exists a network operating behind the scenes, not as a single organization, but as a loose web of influence made up of career officials, intelligence operatives, military leadership, and powerful financial figures who remain in place while elected leaders come and go. These individuals are not voted into power, they rarely appear in headlines, and yet their influence may stretch across decades, shaping decisions in ways that are difficult to trace. And if that sounds extreme, here's where it gets even more interesting, because the real question isn't whether such a network could exist. The real question is how something like this would actually function without being exposed. The first tool, according to these claims, is something you interact with every single day without even realizing its full impact: information. In a world flooded with constant news updates, viral headlines, and breaking alerts, the flow of information shapes how we see reality itself. But who decides what information rises to the top, and what quietly fades away unnoticed? According to some whistleblower accounts, information is not always random. It can be strategically shaped, filtered, and sometimes even guided. Carefully timed leaks, selective disclosures, and stories released at precisely the right moment can shift public perception in powerful ways. And here's the unsettling part. The goal is not always to spread false information, but rather to present a carefully constructed version of the truth, one that highlights certain facts while quietly ignoring others. Because when people believe they are fully informed, they rarely stop to question what might be missing, and that is where influence becomes almost invisible. But here's where things take a darker turn, because controlling information is only one piece of the puzzle. What happens when a leader attempts to go against this supposed system? According to critics of the deep state concept, the response is rarely open confrontation. It is something far more subtle and difficult to detect: resistance. Slow, quiet, and nearly impossible to prove. Policies get delayed. Decisions become stuck in endless layers of bureaucracy. Paperwork disappears, approvals take months, and regulations are interpreted in the most restrictive way possible. From the outside, it appears as incompetence or failure, but from the inside, it can feel like pushing against an invisible barrier that refuses to move. This phenomenon is often described as bureaucratic resistance, and even without any hidden conspiracy, it is a very real aspect of large systems. Governments are complex machines, and once they reach a certain size, they develop their own inertia. Change becomes difficult and sometimes nearly impossible. Now imagine a scenario where a newly elected leader comes into power with bold promises and ambitious reforms, promising to reshape the system entirely, but as time passes, those promises begin to fade, progress stalls, and frustration builds. The public starts to lose confidence, the media shifts its tone, and soon the narrative becomes one of failure rather than resistance. But what if the situation is more complicated than it appears? What if the system itself resists rapid change, not because of a hidden agenda, but because of its own complexity and internal structure? That question alone is enough to make anyone pause, because it challenges a fundamental assumption about power that those at the top are always in control. But what comes next is even more controversial, because some claims suggest that influence can extend into institutions that are meant to protect the nation, including intelligence agencies, surveillance systems, and law enforcement organizations. While there is no verified evidence of a coordinated effort targeting political opponents as a whole, history has shown that in isolated cases, systems can be stretched beyond their intended purpose. Investigations can be launched at critical moments. Leaks can damage reputations overnight, and legal battles can drain resources and credibility, even without a final conviction. In such situations, perception itself becomes a powerful weapon, because the mere suggestion of wrongdoing can alter public opinion, shift narratives, and change the course of entire careers. And that is where power becomes psychological, because sometimes control is not about force, it is about influence, fear, and perception. But here's something most people never stop to consider. What if the real power of such a system isn't in controlling everything, but in controlling just enough to guide outcomes without ever being noticed? Because absolute control is easy to detect, but subtle influence is almost impossible to prove. Imagine a world where decisions are not forced, but gently shaped, where choices still exist. But the options you see are carefully filtered long before you even realize it. It's not about telling people what to think, it's about influencing what they think about. And once you control attention, you begin to influence reality itself. And this is where the modern world adds another layer to the story, because today, influence doesn't just come from governments or institutions, it comes from algorithms. Social media feeds, recommendation systems, and trending topics quietly decide what billions of people see every day. These systems are designed for engagement, not control, but their impact is undeniable, because when certain ideas are amplified while others are buried, perception begins to shift without any direct command. So now the question becomes even more complex. Is influence centralized, or has it become decentralized in a way that's even harder to detect? Because if power is spread across governments, corporations, and technology platforms, then control is no longer about a single hidden group, it becomes an entire ecosystem shaping outcomes collectively. And that possibility is far more unsettling, because you can expose a secret organization. But how do you expose a system that is functioning exactly as it was designed? So at this point, you might be wondering, is any of this actually real? Or is it simply a modern interpretation of systems that are too complex to fully understand? Skeptics argue that the idea of a deep state is nothing more than a convenient explanation for political failures, a way to assign blame to an unseen force rather than acknowledging the natural inefficiencies of large institutions. And they are not wrong, because humans are naturally wired to look for patterns even when none exist. But here's the twist. Even if there is no unified hidden network controlling everything, many of the mechanisms described, information influence, bureaucratic resistance, and institutional power, do exist in different forms. They may not operate as part of a grand conspiracy, but their effects are real and measurable. And that is what makes this topic so compelling, because it sits at the intersection of reality and perception, fact and interpretation, logic and suspicion. And perhaps the most important element in all of this is the human factor, because the individuals working within these systems are not necessarily villains or masterminds. In most cases, they are professionals, doing what they believe is right, making decisions based on stability, security, and long-term consequences. Many see themselves as protectors of the system, ensuring that it does not collapse under sudden or extreme change. But good intentions do not always lead to perfect outcomes, and systems built on control and secrecy can create unintended consequences over time. So where does that leave us? Are we living under hidden control, or are we simply navigating a world too complex to fully understand? The answer may never be simple, but one thing is certain in today's world. Information is power, narratives shape reality, and the more complex a system becomes, the harder it is to see who truly influences it. So what can you do? Not panic, not blindly believe, but question, think critically, and look at information from multiple angles. Ask yourself, why is this story being told? Why now, and who benefits? Because whether or not a hidden system exists in the way some describe, influence is real, power is real, and understanding how it works may be one of the most important skills you can develop. Because the biggest battles in history are not always fought with weapons. Sometimes they are fought with information. And maybe the most powerful people in the world are not the ones you see on stage, but the ones you never see at all. If this topic made you think, question, or even feel a little uncomfortable, that's a good thing. Because the truth is rarely simple, and the deeper you look, the more complex it becomes. Subscribe for more deep dives into hidden power, real intelligence stories, and the secrets shaping our world. Because some of the most important stories in history are the ones no one is supposed to notice.